Hello everybody, it is the Rainbow Brony here again, and it's still a beautiful Monday morning. It's about 2 o'clock right now in the morning. I just got done reading some horror stories. I read Cupcakes again. I just made a red version of The Rainbow Factory. It's a horrible story, gotta tell you that. But I explained it in the previous video, but now I'm going to read Rocket to Insanity and its unofficial alternative ending in one video. Yes, one video. So let's start off with the actual story. So immediately a big red warning. Warning! This work of fiction contains material that may be sensitive to some readers, as murder, gore, and death. Viewer discretion is advised. Well, I get it. Alright, so let's start off. There is evil within the heart of all ponies. Such is the balance of nature. Good can only be prevalent for so long before evil musters its forces and seizes upon the heart, twisting friendships into war, loyalty into deceit, and kindness into unadulterated hate. Unknown author, 622 BL. I have no idea what that means. Whatever. Screams echoed through the cloud palace of Rainbow Dash's home. The filly startled wide awake in a cold sweat, terror surging through her veins. Oh, nightmares again. The 7th time this month, and it has always been the same one. The one with the cupcakes. Flashes of memory. Wait a sec, guys. Flash of memory launched through her head, wings being jacked off, then ripped from their sockets. Needles plunged into her beating heart, adrenaline injected into her body to keep her awake, and alert as the torture went on. The smell of her own flesh cooking, the sight of her own blood and gore spilling from her surgically incised belly, the mastermind behind her terror toying with those glistering organs like they were party favors. She knew in her heart that Pinkie Pie would never be capable of doing such a gruesome act, but that thought didn't help to make the dream any less vivid, because his pony sobbed openly, curling up in her blanket and rocking back and forth as her body trembled with fear. She hasn't told anybody about the dreams, about the lingering feel of steel-piercing flesh and blade-cutting bone. Her work had suffered because of the constant night terrors, the nightmares being so powerful that she was simply afraid of going back to sleep, sometimes staying up altogether in an attempt to stave off the horrors for just one more night. And every pony wondered why she spent most of her day napping in the open and in the daylight, because in the shining brilliance of the sun, it was the only way she could actually rest. But even then, the black clutches of her pure adult subconscious had begun to creep even into that relative safety, following her through the dreaming world. Dash whimpered as tears streaked down her face, staining the fur of her cheeks as wide eyes darted across the darkened scenery of her room. Heart pounding in her chest as breath became hiccuping sobs, her wings cling tight against her form as paranoia began to clutch at the edges of her mind. Shadows lurched and moved in her peripheral vision, routine, natural noise becoming distorted and echoing within her mind, as adrenaline surged through her shivering form. Scroll down. This wasn't healthy. Her mind was slowly breaking under the horrors of her subconscious mind, things that no pony should ever have the slightest thought about chipping away at her psyche. She was starting to crack. Rainbow Dash! Rainbow Dash! Hey, has any pony seen Rainbow Dash around? Applejack trotted through the streets of Ponyville, looking high and low for the town's resident speedster pony. Bystanders just shook their head and shrugged. Ah, horse feathers. Figures that ponies are nowhere to be seen when you really need her, the cow pony said, and continued on through town, hoofbeats kicking up dust as she looked to the sky for the Pegasus pony. Consarn it, Rainbow Dash, where in the wild world of Equestria are you? A long yawn from the branches of a tree behind her met her answer. The pony in question dipping her head down and gazing at Applejack from an upside-down position. What, Applejack? What is it that is so important that you have got to interrupt my napping? The Western pony stomped a hoof on the ground, scrawling at the Pegasus. Now, you know why I'm just making a fuss and find you. You said you were going to bring over a little rainstorm over the crops at Sweet Apple Acres nearly 2 hours ago. Instead, I found you here in a tree, snoozing a little behind off. Dash gave a groan, slipping out of the tree and landing on her hoof, shaking her head. She looked more disheveled than usual, her mane a mess, dark bags under her eyes from many a sleepless nights. She looked pale, sicky almost, yet still tried to put on an air of cheerfulness. She heaved a yawn before giving a dismissive wave to Applejack. Yeah, keep your saddle on. I'll get to it right now. Sorry and stuff. As the Pegasus pony turned down and spread her wings to take off, Applejack tilted her head to the side and gave a little frown. Dash, you feeling okay? You look a little, under the weather. Dash groaned, shrugging her shoulders as she gave her wings a little test flap. Fine, was the only response from the Pegasus. The cow pony behind her stepped forward, giving Dash side a little nudge with her snout. You sure about? She was cut off by the Pegasus suddenly jerking away from Applejack, darting up into the air as her eyes spilled white. Don't touch me. I'm fine, honest. She nearly spilled the beans right then and there. Just refrained. She couldn't take the chance that the other pony might think different of her because she was being scared out of her mind every night by some stupid nightmare. Her body gave a little shiver as Applejack looked on her with concern. Gotta go. Before Applejack could say anything further, Dash was off like a rocket towards Sweet Apple Acre, leaving the cow pony just to scratch her head in confusion. That girl ain't right. Hope my southern accent is good. Let's continue. Another terror-filled night. Dash lay curled up on the floor of her cloud house, blankets swatted around her shivering form. It was worse this time. She had been flayed open, set upon the dining table with the pink earth pony, as slabs of her own meat, dripping with her life fluids, was sheared from her flanks, served to all of her friends, herself still somehow being alive enough to be aware of the entire situation. Hearing the laughter as they devoured her living form, as fork and knife dug into her innards, tearing her apart. She was nothing more than a slab of meat for a friend's enjoyment. Hiccups punctured through heavy sobs as the Pegasus pony clutched at her head, the visions that her nightmares had been visiting upon her ingrained within her memory. Oh God, this is horrible. Every horrible detail, from the fiery pain of rendered flesh to the sickening sound of innards being torn and ripped out of her belly, was cast in vivid depiction. She whined as she lay curled tightly upon the floor, stiffening as tears gushed from her eyes. Just leave me alone. Why won't you leave me alone? She hiccuped, rocking back and forth. I don't deserve this. Just stay out of my head. Get out of my head, please, just get out of my head. Fear turned into anger, Dash beating her hips against her temple. Get out, get out, get out, get out! She wept openly, grinding her forehead against the floor of her room, hoofs pounding at her head, bruising the flesh's pent-up frustration, and deep deprivation erupted in an agonized scream of rage and sorrow. Another night, another crack in the window. Every pony has noticed it. It wasn't the way she walked, the way she talked. Her body language just screamed it. Gone was Rainbow Dash, that cheerful, brash speedster, replaced by some hollow shell. She drifted aimlessly over Ponyville, as weeks of interrupted sleep had taken its toll upon her. All her friends knew that something was up, but none of them knew exactly what to do. She had pushed them away when they tried to confront her, lashing out like a wounded animal at any time they tried to console her or plead her to get help. Too headstrong, someone would say. Too proud, others still. But none of them realized the gravity of the situation until that That one fateful day. The day that Rainbow Dash finally snapped. Guessing this is where the horror part starts. It's been an unseasonable warm spring day in Ponyville. Every pony was out enjoying the temperate weather, from foals to colts, and then some, as every pony went about their business. Lara and Bonbon chatting it up beneath their usual table at the cafe. Applejack selling the first harvest from Sweet Apple Acres, as ponies lined up for those ruby delectables. And within the candy corner, Pinkie Pie was busy darting to and fro. I guess that should be from. In the kitchen, baking up a storm. She glanced at the clock every now and then, frowning each time before the bell to the door finally rang open. A haggard-looking Rainbow Dash entering the shop. "Rainbow, you're finally here! Oh, I've been so worried about you. You've been all mopusy-topusy. So I thought I'd ask you to come visit me so I can make you feel extra super special and cheer you up. But then you didn't show up when I thought you were going to, and I was all sad we were going to stay cooped up in your house all day, but then you came here, and now I know you're here, and now we can have some fun." Dash merely looked at her blankly, before shaking her head and stumbling forward. "Whatever, Pinkie. What did you want me here for?" The energetic earth pony bounced about the kitchen over and towards one of the many ovens of the candy corner before pulling I'm stuttering. Before pulling the door down, reaching in and pulling out a tray of fluffy cupcakes with a generous slathering of icing upon them. She spun around, grinning widely as she showed the baked good off the dish. "I made you cupcakes." Oh gosh, she made him cupcakes. She made her cupcakes. Pinkie, that is the worst thing you can do right now. She's getting nightmares about the cupcake story, so that's just the most stupid thing you can do. She might not know, but this is just... I'm guessing this is the part where it's going to go wrong. Let's continue. Dash paled, mind flashed back to the earliest of those nightmares, the most vivid, the most intense. A tray of cupcakes, tasting it, finding motor skills rapidly deteriorating, stumbling as her body shut down under the effects of some unknown drug. Sorry, a burp. Pinkie Pie looming over her with that trademark grin, eyes gleaming as the world dimmed around her. And here it was, happening for real. Vision became haze as the world began to spin around her. The Pegasus stumbling back and shaking her head, whispering under her breath, "No. No, 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 no!" She backed up, eyes wide with fear as she shook her head violently, looking around frantically for a way out. Any way out? The window? The door? No, I don't want to. Not gonna let you. Let me out of here! Let me out of here! Pinkie merely tilted her head to the side, quizzically, setting down the tray down and lifting a few of the cakes out and plating them, bouncing them over to the shivering Rainbow Dash and offering the plate to the Pegasus. They were the same color, same kind. "Run!" a voice in her head said. Damn stutter. A voice in her head said, "Run! Run, you idiot! Run!" A hoof lashed out, smacking the plate out of Pinkie Pie's hoofs. "I said I don't want 'em! I know what you're doing. It's not gonna work." Pinkie Pie frowned at the discarded cupcakes. But in typical Pinkie fashion, she just shrugged and went about cleaning them out, humming to herself. "Maybe you don't like the avocado. Maybe you don't like avocado icing. But that's okay. I made plenty more, so we can get to make some to your liking. Is that okay, Rainbow Dash?" She glanced back. The Pegasus pony letting out panic, whimpering noises, eyes fixated on the pony before her. Pupils nearly pinpricks as fear and adrenaline coursed through her veins. She was pinned between Pinkie and the wall behind her, even with heavy gasps, her sleep deprived, I don't know. Horror-filled minds played the scene from her nightmares all over and over again, of the saw rendering through the flesh, cutting to the bone. "Run!" Oh, wait. Wait a sec. "Get away!" Scalpel piercing her breast, dragging through her flesh down to get to her groin, flaying her open like some sick sort of piñata. Move! Just get away, get away, get away, get away, get away. He was hyperventilating by now, no longer seeing a longtime friend, but a horrific, sadistic butcher. Do something! And then she saw it, that shining, sharp protector, just sitting there on the table next to her. The voice within her mind whispered to her like a seductive lover, sounding so wrong but so right at the same time. Oh God! Here starts the horror part. Here she snaps. I see. Kill her. Dash hesitated. Part of her wanted to scream, another to run, but yet another considered the request. Kill her before she kills you. Her mind was a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts. The Pegasus feeling sick to her stomach, weak in the knees. The beat of her own heart pounding within her head. Take the knife. She stared at it, hope slowly stretching out, trembling as part of her still roared, still tried to reason. Take it. Take the knife. Tears streamed down her face as her hoof hovered above the handle of the tool, turned weapon, as if the last frayed strands of her sanity knew what was happening. Knew it was fighting a battle it was going to lose. Take it! She snatched it up, holding it in front of her at Pinkie Pie with shaky hooves, her ears splayed back against her head, hiccuping between sobs. Just leave me alone, please. Pinkie Pie, just leave me alone. Oh, uh-oh. Pinkie Pie looked at the knife being wielded by her friend for a moment, before giggling and bouncing over towards Dash, whose heart sank as the filly rapidly approached. Oh, Dash, you silly filly, you got me good with that one. Never one to turn down an opportunity to prank, huh? She didn't think, her body acting on its own. A gasp. Pinkie Pie looking thunderstruck as Dash heaved, frozen midair, the silvery blade of the knife dripping with a red ichor. Pinkie Pie brought a hoof to her cheek. Oh God, this is gonna be horrible. The silvery blade of the knife dripping with red ichor. Pinkie Pie brought a hoof up to her cheek, dabbing at the white cut, looking at her own blood-stained hoof. Dash, what? I told you to stay away. Why couldn't you just stay away? Kill her. No, she's my friend. I can't. Kill her, and the hurting will stop. Please, Pinkie, just run, just run. Oh God, please don't make me do this. Kill her, 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 kill her. What happened next was a blur, the memory fuzzy in Dash's mind, as Pinkie Pie tried to make sense of the sudden attack upon her person. Dash let out a chilling mix between a wail and a scream, catching the earth pony off guard as the blade darted forward. Oh God. Slashing through her neck. Severing vein and artery as a gout of crimson issued forth from the wound. Shock and surprise registered on Pinkie Pie's face as she gargled blood. Oh fuck, man. God damn it, I'm seeing all this in front of me right now. This is fucking horrible. What? Hemorrhaging from that wound, staining her pink fur with the red hue of her life essence. Again and again that silver blade struck out. Dash's speed not restricted her to her flight as she plunged the blade into the filly before at a rapid pace, sobbing hysterically as she carved the squirming and flailing filly up, through the breast, through bone. Pinkie's struggle slowly faded as her blood was spilled onto the floor of the Candy Corner's kitchen, pooling around her, splattering the Pegasus atop of her with a hot, red fluid. Just leave me alone, she screamed out, fear turning to rage. You couldn't just go away, could you? You had to keep coming back. Pinkie's struggles grew weaker and weaker, her eyes wide with terror as tears streamed down her face. Visage frozen in a mix of fear and anguish. What did she do? Was it the icing? Did she use salt instead of sugar? Why? As those slowly glazing eyes stared up at Dash, the strikes of the blade grew slower and slower. The Pegasus finally plunging the implement deep into Pinkie's chest, spearing through the filly's heart, ending her party once and for all. Dash heaved for breath, limbs shaken as she looked down upon her handiwork. Blood stained her furs and feathers, painting her a deep crimson, wearing the life force out of her former friend like some macabre outfit. She sobbed, letting out a wail of anguish as she realized the gravity of what she had just done. Arms wrapped around the butchered filly, Dash holding the warm corpse of her friend tight. No, 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 I didn't. Oh, Celestia, no, what have I done? What did I do? Dash's body shook as her chest heaved with each gut-wrenching cry of anguish, suddenly letting go of Pinky's body and letting out an ear-piercing shriek of terror as she looked down at her own hooves. Oh, fuck, this is... I'm shaking right now. Seriously. Blood and pursuer coated them, dripping down through her fur, the scene straight from a horror movie lay before her eyes. She skidded backwards, slipping in the pool of blood of her own creation, slamming cheek first into the pile of gore before finally gaining purchase, and dragging herself over against the farthest wall of Pinky's still form, her stomach mutinying on her as she emptied its contents upon the floor next to her. Her mind raced, thoughts running a mile a minute as she hiccuped, wide, terror-filled eyes staring at the scene made by her own hoof. Murder. She had committed murder on one of her own friends. It was unheard of. No pony had murdered another in hundreds of years. Voices within her mind clawed and whispered to her, the world spinning around her as time seemed to stand still for her. The last vestige of her sanity being plucked apart, one by one, until that final thread finally snapped. Hopes grasped at her head, matting her rainbow-colored mane down with blood and ichor. The Pegasus rocking back and forth into the blooded kitchen as a crazed grin spread across her muzzle, hummingly disjoined to herself. Giggle at the gasty, snortle at the spoon. Dash threw her head back, curled legs against her chest, as forelimbs wrapped around them, psychological laughter issuing forth from the speedster Pegasus, as her world shattered around her, psyche and spirit broken and splintered. I don't know if I'm ready for the alternative ending. Seriously, I'm fucking... I don't know what to say. No scary picture, alright. Better read it all in one go. Rocket to Insanity, the alternative ending. Alright, I'm just going to read it. Just before he murders her. As the blade pierced Pinkie Pie's chest, Rainbow Dash's sanity came sweeping back to her, and she immediately regretted what she did. Trembling, she dropped the bloodied blade, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Red liquid poured from the huge gash in Pinkie's chest, and all she could do was utter, why? Before she collapsed on the ground, her eyes a blank stare. Rainbow Dash stared at Pinkie Pie in disbelief. Oh God, what have I done? Her heart began to pound in her chest as she made sense of her horrible act. She had just assaulted one of her friends like the very monster in her dreams did to her. Panicking, she fell onto her back and started to crawl away from the ghastly scene. Her mind raced with uncertainty of what to do, until finally she let her instincts take over. She stood up, spread her wings, and flew out the door, screaming, "Help! Someone help me!" Her frantic cries were heard all across the village, and multiple ponies came to her aid. "What's wrong?" one of them inquired. "It's Pinkie Pie. She's hurt badly," she admitted with tears flowing from her eyes. One of the ponies struck her head into the bakery and gasped, "Oh God! Someone get the nurse ponies out here right away!" A nearby Pegasus had heard her request and acted immediately. She spread her wings and flew towards the direction of the hospital. The pony that made the request then turned her head toward Rainbow Dash. How did this happen? I, I don't know, Rainbow Dash lied. Oh god, she's lying too. She was like this when I arrived. Rainbow Dash, why are you lying? You need help, man. Girl, I should say. The pony believed her. At least, she acted like she did, as she called over other ponies to help with the injured mare. Rainbow Dash wanted to help, but her hooves locked up as she could only stare in wide-eyed terror as she watched her friend slip away as blood seeped out from the gaping wound in her chest. A fast response brought many nurse ponies with medical supplies to the scene. With the help of the other ponies, the nurse ponies were able to get Pinkie Pie patched up and carried out on the stretcher towards the hospital. While the other ponies hurried along to make sure Pinkie Pie would be alright, Rainbow Dash stayed behind, hovering in the air, as she stared off in the distance at the shrinking crowd. A monster, she said to herself before she broke down in tears and flew off in the opposite direction. After a long ordeal in the emergency room, and with all of Pinkie Pie's friends, with the exception of Rainbow Dash, waiting nervously in the waiting room for news on her friend's status, a nurse pony finally came out to meet them. They immediately crowded around her, and Twilight asked a question that resounded on every pony's mind. Tell me, nurse. Understands? If she going to live, but I guess it's is. The nurse's pony opened her mouth, and all of the ponies' hearts stopped, beating in their chest in anticipation of the news. Yes, the pony said. All of the ponies sighed with relief. Oh God, thank you, Twilight expressed. It was a close call for a while, but we managed to save her. She's recovering now, the nurse pony explained. Do y'all know who did this to her? Applejack inquired. The nurse pony shook her head. I'm afraid not, although she was mumbling something as we operated her. It was very soft, so I don't know if I heard it correctly. Let me see. The nurse pony tried to recall. I think it was Rainbow. Why? All of the ponies gasped and stared at each other in disbelief. Rainbow Dash huddled up beneath a tree with her wings folded across her chest and her hoofs locked across her knees as she stared to the ground miserably. Many thoughts raced through her mind, and she kept reliving the events that transpired at the bakery. Every memory was more vivid and horrifying than the last. How could I have done such a thing? The question reeled in her mind. She gripped her head and started to rock back and forth until the memories of the assault overwhelmed her and she wailed out in misery. I found her! Rainbow Dash heard suddenly, and it snapped her out of her trance. She lowered her hooves and looked up to see Twilight and the rest of her friends padding toward her. Scroll down. Oh, this is... Oh, God. They stopped in front of her, and Applejack was the first to confront her. Tell me, Rainbow Dash, did you do this to Pinkie Pie? Rainbow Dash looked down at the ground in shame and muttered, Yes. Applejack frowned, her legs furrowed. She turned away, giving her the cold shoulder, only to suddenly buck her legs hard into Rainbow Dash's snout. Rainbow Dash's head snapped back before slamming against a tree trunk. She collapsed against it, splotches of blood pooling on the grass between her legs, as she gripped her drawly bleeding snout with a hoof. It wasn't broken, but she knew Applejack could have easily done that. So she had what? Applejack could have easily done so when she had wanted it. It seems she wasn't quite willing to go that far. She turned around. Boiling anger plastered on her face as she barked. A friend who attacks another friend like that is no friend of mine. With that, she ran off. Rainbow Dash lowered her head without saying a word as Applejack trotted away. Rarity was up next, and she didn't hesitate to bring a hoof hard against the side of Rainbow Dash's face. Blood flowing was from her bleeding snout from the sheer force of her clop. and Rainbow Dash gripped her now throbbing cheekbone with her other free hoof as she looked away in shame. "How could you?" Rarity scorned before she ran out with tears in her eyes. Oh, now comes Fluttershy. Next up was Fluttershy, who looked just as angry as the white others. She raised her hoofs in preparation to strike at Rainbow Dash, who closed her eyes and tensed up in preparation for the assault. However, all she felt was light thumbs, and she opened her eyes back up to see Fluttershy bending at her futilely, I don't know how to pronounce that, in a rage as her eyes started to water up. Eventually, she couldn't take the hurt anymore and flew off, sobbing. Somehow, Fluttershy's assault hurt worst of all. One by one, her friends abandoned her, and she couldn't blame them. She didn't deserve their friendship, not after what she had done. All that was left was Twilight, who stared at her with her furrowed eyes, but didn't say anything. Rainbow Dash broke the silent tension with Twilight. Why, Rainbow Dash? Why would you do such a terrible thing? Twilight inquired. Rainbow Dash breathed in deep. She was hesitant to speak of the horror she had experienced, but she knew she had to, for it would be the first step she needed to take if she wanted to find redemption for her actions. After a long exhale, she told Twilight everything she had kept bottled up for so long. Nightmares. Such terrible nightmares. I could see Pinkie Pie standing over me with a scalpel, ready to cut in my flesh and rip up my organs. It was awful, horrible. Every night was the same, until I started reliving it every waking hour. Then, the next thing I knew, she was offering my cupcakes. I think it says me cupcake. She was offering me cupcakes. I guess that was a little error there. The very cupcakes she used in my nightmares to subdue me so that she could mutilate me at her own place. And so I panicked, grabbed the closest weapon I could find, and that's when tears began to flow from her eyes. I attacked her. Twilight couldn't believe her ears. She had no idea that her friend was slowly going mad, and she immediately wrapped her arms around her and held her tight. "Oh, Dash, I'm so sorry. I can't begin to imagine what you've been going through, and I wish I would have been there for you." Rainbow Dash cried on her shoulder as Twilight embraced her, consoling her at best she could. Blood dribbled onto her shoulder, but she didn't care, because her friend needed her right now. The embrace outlasted the tears and the blood. Once Rainbow Dash had finally calmed down a bit, Twilight said to her, "You have to tell Pinkie Pie what happened." Sorry. Rainbow Dash grew frightened at the prospect. "No, I couldn't. She wouldn't want to see me after what I've done." "Look, I know you're scared, but as far as Pinkie Pie knows, you did this on purpose. Do you want her to think that?" Rainbow Dash's eyes widened at the prospect. As terrified as she was of how Pinkie Pie would react to seeing her, her thoughts of her believing that her attack was one of spite or anger or anything was too much to bear. With newfound resolve, she stood up and said, "Lead the way." Twilight smiled and nodded. "You're doing the right thing, but first, we need to get you cleaned up." Rainbow Dash had momentarily forgotten about her cervical pain and the mess her bleeding snout had made out of her hooves and face. "Oh yeah, that," she grumbled. They headed toward a nearby fountain, and though some ponies turned their head in bequeathed interest of Rainbow Dash's bruises and bleeding snout, they did not confront her. Some even whispered among themselves as they passed by. When they glanced at them, they turned away their heads quickly. They turned away their heads quickly away. Were they afraid of me? Rainbow Dash wondered. They couldn't blame them if they did. She was a monster, after all. Rainbow Dash dipped her head in the mountain. The mountain. Rainbow Dash dipped her head in the fountain and washed off all the blood staining her face and hooves. When she was all cleaned up, she nodded toward Twilight, who led her toward the hospital. When they reached the steps, Rainbow Dash froze up. She suddenly found herself doubting her reasons for being here. She's not going to want to see me, she thought. She'll hate me more, she thought further. But a comforting hoof on her shoulder aroused Rainbow Dash from her paranoid delusions. Twilight nodded to her, and she took a deep breath before taking those last few steps into the hospital. The place was pretty vacant. There were a few sickly ponies lunging about, waiting impatiently for the doctor to see them. But no serious injuries. At least, nothing compared to Rainbow Dash's act of cruelty. Twilight went to the front desk and asked if they could see Pinkie Pie. The nurse pony nodded and directed them into one of the back rooms. Twilight called out to Rainbow Dash to follow, and she reluctantly did. They came to a bedroom in the back, and the nurse pony showed them the door. Then she said something about keeping her visit short before trotting off. Rainbow Dash floated up to the glass window of the door and peered inside. What she saw made her heart sink. Pinkie was there, lying in bed. Bandages wrapped around her chest, and a tube connected to a blood bag in her right hoof. Fuck. Look at the last story. I'm freaking shaking, and I'm nearly crying here. Right, here we go again. What really made Rainbow Dash feel so terrible, though, was she looked so weak. She was resting for the time being, but her breathing was soft and her eyes, although closed, looked so sad. Rainbow Dash lost control of herself and started to cry. I can't do this, Twilight. You've come this far. You can't quit now. Go in there and talk to her. Rainbow Dash sighed. She knew Twilight was right. She had to see her, to tell her how sorry she was. With a deep breath, she reached for the door handle and pulled. The door opened with ease, and Rainbow Dash floated in silently. She could see Pinkie Pie so clearly now, so weak and helpless, it made her heart ache. She stepped toward her and lowered herself next to Pinkie Pie's bedside. She looked up to the injury she was wrought. While the gash had been covered up, the blood splotched showing the bandages gave her a perfect idea of just how seriously the injury was. Oh my god, I'm getting emotional here again. Shit. This is gonna be a pretty hard scene for me to do. Alright, here we go. Tears formed in her eyes as she gripped the pink pony's dangling hoof with her own and squeezed. Oh, Pinkie Pie, I'm so sorry, so very sorry, very sorry. She began to weep on her bedside, the sheets sopping up most of her tears. Pinkie Pie was roused from her slumber. She opened her eyes weakly and stared at the ceiling. She heard weeping and turned her head when she noticed Rainbow Dash sitting next to her. Her face lit up, and a smile across her cheeks. Dash, is that you? Rainbow Dash gasped and looked up. The way Pinkie Pie was smiling at her put her at a loss. Why was she smiling, she thought. I almost killed her. It is you. I'm so glad you came by. I was so worried about you when you didn't show up with the rest of your friends. Worried? About me? Why? Because you're my best friend, silly filly, Pinkie Pie exclaimed cheerfully. For the first time in her life, Rainbow Dash felt true sadness in her heart. Fuck. The very pony she almost murdered not only still considered her a friend, but her best friend. Rainbow Dash felt new tears form in her eyes, and she looked at Pinkie Pie with extreme sadness, her lips quivering. Pinkie Pie cocked her head at me. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Pinkie Pie, please forgive me. I don't know why I did what I did. I cannot express how sorry I am," she lamented, tears flowing from her eyes. Pinkie Pie reached up and wiped her tears away. "Don't cry, Rainbow Dash. It's okay. I forgive you. I know you would never do something like that intentionally. Best friends forever forgive each other, no matter what." Rainbow Dash smiled wildly, tears of joy replacing her sad ones, as she hugged Pinkie Pie lovingly, careful not to jostle her. "Thank you, Pinkie Pie." Pinkie Pie closed her eyes and whispered, "Anything for you, Dash." Oh fuck, man. It's just so beautiful, man. Seriously, I'm sitting here with damp eyes. Fuck. Oh god. Oh man. Alright, there we go again. Meanwhile, Twilight watched down from the window, and when she saw the events transpiring before her, she couldn't help but smile. "Good for them," she said to herself before trotting off to find her friends. They had to know the truth. Rainbow Dash stayed with Pinkie Pie until a nurse pony came to inform her that visiting hours were over. Rainbow Dash didn't want to leave, but she knew the importance of good bed rest for an injured pony like Pinkie Pie, and so did what is best for her. With a long embracing hug, the two parted ways, and Rainbow Dash finally headed home. Scroll down again. She idly considered herself going to talk to the other fillies that were so upset with her early, but convinced herself that it was too soon for that. When she got to her cloud house, she stared at her bed with uncertainty. This was where the nightmares began, and she feared that they would happen again tonight. However, she was far too exhausted from her long ordeal to consider any alternative. Despite her physical pain, she had little trouble scumbling to the sweet respite of sleep. Her nightmares didn't haunt her that night. In the morning, Rainbow Dash felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. "My throat is getting sore." Well rested. Although she was still in a bit of pain from her physical injuries, it was now at a tolerable level. It would take us a few days more for a bruise to heal, and much longer for the emotional ones. Still, she was happy for the first time in a long time, and she wasted no time getting out of bed that day. After a warm, relaxing bath to get the knots out of her joints, and a thorough grooming session to fix her horribly mangled mane and tail, she decided to head off to see Pinkie Pie in the hospital. However, before she made it very far, a thought crossed her mind and a light went on in her head. With a smile, she switched directions and instead headed to Pinkie Pie's bakery. When she arrived, the first thing she noticed was that the bakery was void of life. That was to be expected. However, it was only recently the scene of a crime. Rainbow Dash swooped into the doorway and looked around. It was pretty much the way they left it. Only the bloodstains were cleared and the weapon used in the assault was removed from the scene. Rainbow Dash was relieved. However, she didn't want to be reminded of that horrific attack. Wasting no time, Rainbow Dash collected up one of Pinkie Pie's cookbooks and proceeded to read through a certain cupcake recipe. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. 'Cause a certain cupcake recipe, after a bit of trial and error, oh yeah, I know this. As said to my little Dashie, according to the fanfics, they were right. She really is a horrible cook. I just know it. After a bit of trial and error, Rainbow Dash finally managed to make some cupcakes that she thought were of acceptable quality. Therefore, she topped them off, each with a different type of icing, before she collected them into a basket and carried out of the door on her wings. She stopped in her tracks when she arrived outside. There, waiting for her, were all her former friends, along with Twilight. Wow. Burp. Herp derp derp. Rarity was the first to step forward, and when she was close enough, she raised her hoof. Rainbow Dash closed her eyes and turned her head, grimacing as she prepared herself for another hard smack. But it never arrived. Instead, she felt a hoof rest on her shoulder. Rainbow Dash turned her head back toward Rarity and opened her eyes. To her surprise, she noticed that Rarity was smiling. Twilight explained everything to us. To think that you were suffering like that, it's absolutely dreadful. Therefore, I am sorry for hitting you. I should have given you a chance to explain yourself first. Can you forgive me? Rainbow Dash retorted. No, Rarity, you don't need to apologize for anything. I deserved it for what I have done. It is I that should be begging for your forgiveness. Then how about we both say we're sorry together? That sounds fair. On 3. 1, 2, 3. I'm sorry, Rainbow Dash and Rarity said in unison. Then they smiled at each other and hugged. Next up was Fluttershy, who wrapped her hoofs around Rainbow Dash and squeezed tight. Rainbow Dash returned the embrace. No words were said, but Rainbow Dash didn't need them, as all the sudden wetness on her shoulder expressed Fluttershy's feeling perfectly. Fuck. I'm beginning to cry again. It's so soft. It's so beautiful. Alright. Alright, here we go. Last was Applejack. Her expression was of anger still, or so it seems. And as she still had her eyes furrowed at Rainbow Dash, she walked up to her. Rainbow Dash's smile faded as she watched Applejack with uncertainty while she closed the gap between them. Then she sat on her haunches and stared sharply at her. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. But eventually, Applejack broke the tension with a sigh, saying, "If everyone can forgive you, then I suppose I can too." Friends again? She held out a hoof. Rainbow Dash smile returned. Friends again, she replied as she pressed her free hoof against hers. Twilight stepped forward and said, "We all want you to know that we love you, and that we will always be here for you no matter what." "Thanks, guys. I love you too," Rainbow Dash replied as a tear rolled down her cheek. Oh my. Darn it. Stupid fanfic, why you make me cry so much? I'm on a drink. I'm gonna get a drink after in a couple minutes. Alright. Now let's go visit Pinkie Pie, Twilight concluded. "Yeah," they all said in unison. They arrived at the hospital a short time later, and it only took a short time for the nurse pony to escort them to Pinkie Pie's room. As usual, oh wait, I'm scrolling down. As usual, Pinkie Pie was delighted to see all her friends, most of all Rainbow Dash, and they all gave her a proper greeting with a hug and a "get well soon." "Pinkie Pie, I have something for you," Rainbow Dash told her after they greeted each other properly. "Ooh, what could it be?" Pinkie Pie inquired with enthusiasm. Rainbow Dash smiled, placing the basket on blankets covering her stomach, and removed the sheets. "Cupcakes." Pinkie Pie's eyes lit up. "Cupcakes? For me?" Rainbow Dash nodded cheerfully. "Yep." Rainbow Dash grabbed one with a hoof and immediately began to nibble on it. "They're so good," she said with a mouthful. What a thoughtful gift, Twilight commanded her. Well, that's just how I roll. Rainbow Dash responded. She was finally sounding like her old self again. Uh-oh. I'm not sure what's gonna happen next, but I don't think it's gonna. There's it. Alright, well. Pinkie Pie reached for another one, brought it up to her mouth, and then stopped as she stared at the other fillies gathered around her. Something wrong, dear? Rarity inquired. The other stared at Pinkie Pie with concern. There's something wrong, Pinkie Pie said gloomily as she lowered return the cupcake to the basket. The others' expression turned to that of dread. Then Pinkie Pie's expression changed to happiness again. You guys haven't had a taste yet. She held the basket out to all her friends. The others smiled and took the cupcakes for themselves and gorged. Oh wow, y'all made these, Rainbow Dash? They're delicious, Applejack praised. Very much so, Fluttershy answered cheerfully. Rainbow Dash rubbed the back of her head, blushing at all the praise. Aw, shucks, you guys. She glanced over each of her friends as they ate and smiled herself. They weren't just her friends. They were her comrades. Ponies that will always be there for her, even though her worst of times, now and forever. She was truly blessed. The six talked as they ate, breaking only to take another bite of the delicious cupcakes. They joked, they laughed, but most importantly, they hung out like the best of friends should. As visiting hours ended, the ponies laid their goodbyes and headed off towards their respective homes, all except for Rainbow Dash. She had been behind in her work and had a lot of catching up to do. She worked busily for the rest of the day, clearing the clouds and making sure it rained where it needed to. For the first time in a long time, Rainbow Dash had her spunk back, and she wasn't about to let it go in waste. Uh-oh. Oh, this is not good. Her nightmares returned that night, but they weren't the same as before. This time, she saw herself standing over Pinkie Pie, ready to dig the scalpel into her chest. At the moment she did, she woke up screaming. Moments later, there was a hoof on her shoulder, and she gasped out in fright. She swerved her head, only to see Fluttershy hovering over her. Fluttershy, what? I snuck in after you went to sleep. I was worried you had those awful nightmares again, and I didn't want you to be alone. Please don't be angry. But she wasn't angry. On contrary, she was grateful she was there, and could find her in the details of her nightmare. Oh, how terrible! We can't have you dreaming about such horrid things again. I will stay with you and make sure those nightmares don't bother you again. Rainbow Dash smiled at her. Thanks, Fluttershy. They curled up in bed together, and when Rainbow Dash finally managed to fall back to sleep, she slept soundly for the rest of the night. The next day, Fluttershy encouraged Rainbow Dash to tell all her friends about her nightmares, and she followed her advice. When they heard about it, they all agreed to help out by letting Rainbow Dash stay at their homes until her nightmare stopped. She was happy to oblige. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry if I don't. Over the next few days, she repeated the process of making cupcakes for Pinkie Pie and shared them with her and all of her friends. When visiting hours ended, she returned to her chores, and by the time night came, she headed not to her own home, but to the home of one of their friends. They were always willing to accommodate her with whatever she needed, and were always by her side to comfort her whenever her nightmares returned. Every night, her nightmares came few and farther between. 2 weeks later, Pinkie Pie was released from the hospital. Though she had a clean bill of health, she was still encouraged to take it easy for the next few weeks. She wore no more bandages, but the scar from Rainbow Dash's assault remained. A grim reminder to all her friends of what Rainbow Dash did to her. However, Rainbow Dash treated it as a sign to never forget the friendship they had for each other, and for her nightmares. Thanks to the constant help and support of her friends, they never bothered her again. The end. Well, that's just a great story breaker. It just suddenly turns around. Alright, this is really a beautiful ending of the story. So yeah, that's another horror story and another beautiful ending. So yeah, I'm just gonna let my computer render all these videos I'm making. Yeah, I'm pretty bored on Sunday night, Monday morning, I should say. So yeah, I'll see you guys later. Rate, comment, and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. So give that like button some love, give that subscribe button some love, and of course keep watching my channel for more videos of me. Rainbow Brony out.